Joe Powell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's now over 7.5 years since 72 people lost their lives at Grenfell Tower in my constituency in North Kensington. A greater loss of life than any terrorist attack in London's history. 7.5 years of no justice, 7.5 years of no meaningful change. A tragedy that was entirely preventable, entirely foreseen, and to our shame as a country, as the recent fire in Dagenham showed, could happen again today. As the Grenfell inquiry sets out, it occurred because individuals and organisations were systematically dishonest, put profit before lives, and were part of a system and a culture that too often denies agency and power to those living in social housing in this country. And I want to pay tribute to the next of kin, bereaved survivors in our community, many of whom have joined us here today, for their resilience and strength in continuing to fight for truth, justice and change. I know with each hearing, each story, each government announcement, each new promise of change, you're forced to relive the horrific events of that night. And I know today will be painful too. Your voices must remain at the heart of this government's response and to all future decisions about Grenfell. And I hope I speak for the whole House when I say to you that justice will only truly be served when there are criminal prosecutions and those responsible pay the price. I welcome, of course, the Prime Minister's apology on September 4th on behalf of the British state. And I want to thank Sir Martin Morbick and the whole inquiry team. The report is an important step to uncovering the truth of what happened that night, who was responsible, and what must be done to ensure such a tragedy is never repeated. But the path to justice is long, and we are far from the end. In recent meetings with the Courts Minister and the Metropolitan Police, I've been clear that our community is watching and waiting. And I urge all involved to remain focused on expediting the process as much as possible. And I fully understand the frustration that has taken this long. On June the 24th, 2017, then Ministers Alok Sharma and Nick Hurd wrote to bereaved families. They said, and I quote, "The public inquiry will not delay the conclusion of the police inquiry, and that if any criminal proceedings result from these investigations, we would not expect them to be delayed by the establishment of a public inquiry." That has clearly not come to pass. Justice has been delayed, but it must not be denied. And while we wait for the police and the CPS to complete their work, there are actions that must be taken now. Companies identified in the report, such as Arconic, Ryden, Kingspan and Celotex, must be excluded from public contracts while criminal investigations are ongoing. And I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for her commitment to this, and I agree with my right honourable friend from Sheffield South East that local authorities across the country should be encouraged to follow suit. But justice, Madam Deputy Speaker, is about more than contracts and criminal charges, and it goes beyond Grenfell. Across the country, up to 1 million people are still stuck in unsafe buildings, victims of the building safety crisis. The National Audit Office has just reported that on current trends, it will take until at least 2037 before the last unsafe building is remediated at a cost of £16.6 billion. So I absolutely welcome the government's announcement today that it will speed up the remediation work and that developers will be forced to double the pace of fixing the crisis, and that building owners who sit on their hands will be subject to severe penalties. And this is right, because while residents wait, they also pay the cost. In a block of flats in Earls Court, just 2 miles south of Grenfell, a recent fire inspection found flammable rendering. The insurance premium has gone up from £15,000 a year to £375,000 a year, meaning an extra £400 a month in service charges for leaseholders. So while leaseholders face this increasing cost of living crisis and the fear of living in buildings that are unsafe, I do believe the insurance industry has so far failed to tackle the problem. The Association of British Insurers committed to bring down costs, but the experience of my constituents shows it is not working. So I'm delighted that the government has committed to work with insurers to urgently consider how bills can be reduced during remediation programmes. And it cannot come soon enough. I know honourable members from across this House will have their own horror stories. Leaseholders who can't sell, can't move on with their lives, are caught in the middle between freeholders, developers, managing agents and all levels of government. So my test of this government's plan and whether it will be deemed a success is whether it brings this merry-go-round of buck passing to an end. I know the government is also considering its formal response to the inquiry, including ending the chaotic and fragmented regulatory system. Accountability for building regulations should be streamlined under a single Secretary of State. We need one regulator, a high-quality, well-resourced public body reporting directly to that Secretary of State. And we need robust product regulation. Currently, only a third of construction products are regulated. Instead, all construction products should be subject to regulation to ensure safety and public trust. And of course, this inquiry is just one of many recent high-profile public inquiries into state injustices, from Hillsborough to the Post Office, Windrush, infected blood, and LGBT veterans. And I welcome the government's resolve to righting the wrongs of the past and tackling these injustices, which the previous government largely had failed to budget for. Time and again, we've seen a pattern of inaction. Too many life-saving recommendations from public inquiries and inquests have been ignored by corporate bodies and government departments. And this failure to act has had fatal consequences. Had the coroner's recommendations following the Lakanal House fire, which claimed 6 lives, been implemented, the Grenfell tragedy would likely have been prevented. And the previous government dragged their feet on implementing personal emergency evacuation plans for disabled people from Phase 1. So I welcome the government's announcement today on the next steps to protect disabled tenants. And it is examples like this, Madam Deputy Speaker, that have convinced me that we must consider an independent oversight body, answerable to Parliament, to track the implementation of inquiry recommendations and prevent avoidable deaths. And I, of course, also welcome the commitment to passing the Hillsborough Law duty of candour to ensure public authorities and officials act in the public interest with openness, honesty and transparency about their actions, decisions and failings. And nowhere is the need for candour and oversight more evident than with the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, which failed residents in years leading up to the Grenfell fire, on the night of the tragedy and in its aftermath. The inquiry determined that RBKC, and I quote, bears considerable responsibility for the dangerous condition of the building, highlighted a persistent indifference to fire safety, and found that their response was muddled, slow, indecisive and piecemeal, with RBKC ill-equipped to deal with a serious emergency, exposing a complete failure to protect and serve the community it was entrusted to care for. And even today, many North Kensington residents still rely on community groups for essential support and services. In stark contrast to the failures of RBKC, it was the community that acted decisively and heroically on the night of the fire and in its immediate aftermath. And I am proud of how our community responded to the fire and continues to support residents across North Kensington. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is not just about one council. It's about a culture of neglect and disrespect that impacts millions of people living in social housing across the country. 60% of my casework in Kensington and Bayswater relates to slow repairs, damp, mould, overcrowding and poor communication from landlords. On Saturday, I visited a council estate close to Grenfell and spoke with many residents. A woman who's been in temporary accommodation for 19 years out of the borough and had to chase relentlessly to get her moved back home. A resident with an extractor fan that's been broken for years despite multiple surveyors coming to assess the job.
Would my friend give way on that point?
I would, yeah.
I thank him for making such a powerful speech on behalf of his constituents. What he's described there can reflect all our inboxes. Does he agree that actually to address residents tenants and leaseholders' concerns in a timely manner with good customer care doesn't cost any money.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and she's absolutely right. In fact, the wasted resources in time, in precious resources that housing associations and councils have, in people taking time off work and disrupting their lives to deal with this inefficiency in repairs, is something we have to fix. And I'm really hopeful that incoming legislation will, for example, on Awab's law, will help with that. And as I said, this case study from just Saturday is a good example. My constituent forced to open the windows to prevent mould coming into her home means she's paying thousands in extra energy bills over the past few years while she waits for the council to fix it. And on the Lancaster West estate itself, where Grenfell is located, there are concerns that the promise from all levels of government for a modern 21st century social housing estate will not be fulfilled. So it's essential that RBKC, residents and ministers agree a plan to complete the refurbishment with transparency and accountability on budgets and timelines, because those residents have been living on a building site for far too long. And it's not enough just to talk about change. It is until the tenants of RBKC and the housing associations in my constituency are treated with respect and have access to the rights they are entitled to, then they will rightly lack trust in the institutions that are meant to serve them. Just last week, the regulator found one of our major housing associations, Notting Hill Genesis, to be non-compliant after an inspection revealed governance failings and poor health and safety outcomes for tenants. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't want to just criticise. I want to help RBKC and our housing associations to find solutions. In the new year, we'll be launching a new campaign on social housing quality in Kensington and Bayswater, because I want our community to be a trailblazer on how to implement Awab's law on damp and mould, how to enforce the new decent home standard, how to break people out of the doom cycle of endless emails, phone calls, missed appointments and subcontractors to get even simple repairs done. And if we can't get it right in Kensington and Bayswater, given Grenfell, given our amazing community organisations, and given we're on the front line of the nation's housing crisis, then what hope does the rest of the country have? And central to this campaign will be the voice of tenants. So I want to extend an open invitation to anyone who can help to join our campaign and make a practical difference for the community. Madam Deputy Speaker, it's now been over 7 years since the bereaved survivors and local community endured a tragedy that changed their lives forever. I will continue to advocate in this place for truth, justice and lasting change, and for Grenfell bereaved and survivors to be heard. Their dignity and resilience have held up a mirror to us as a nation, forcing us to confront a fundamental question. Do we truly give everyone an equal voice in how this country is run? The opportunity is for this government, a mission-led government, to focus on service and give people a real say in decisions that affect them. We cannot afford to continue with nearly 1 million people sleeping in unsafe buildings. We cannot afford another Grenfell Tower. So true justice means criminal charges for those responsible. It means a complete culture change with respect for every tenant, and it means every child in this country growing up in a safe and decent home. That must be the legacy of Grenfell.
Liberal Durham McCarthy spokesperson Gideon Amos.